be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your programme once again.
Hey everybody, this is Steve Marinucci, and this is just a quick introduction. I'm going to be talking with Mark Lewisohn, and all I can say, it was a great conversation. We got through a lot of things, and yes, we did talk about the question of when the books are going to be published. I think you will enjoy it. Without any further ado, here it is. Hello, everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, and I'm very, very proud and pleased, and I can't say more than that, to welcome Mark Lewisohn to the show. Mark, how you doing?
I'm good. Good. Thank you, Steve.
I'm doing fine. We're here to talk about the movie Evolver 62, which just came out on video about a week or so ago and is now available for purchase on DVD and Blu-ray and also digital. And I'm going to start out, I know you've been doing lectures in England, and because I know you did one on Abbey Road, and now you've done this one. Were there others too besides those two?
Yeah, it all started with a lecture I did in 2018 at Ken Womack's Symposium for, no, what album was it? Abbey Road. No, the White Album.
Mm-hmm.
Getting my albums mixed up. The White Album anniversary in 2018, which was then 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
He had a symposium in Monmouth University in New Jersey, and I did the keynote talk there. And it was, as usual with me, it was packed with content and therefore ran quite long, but it was good. And I was going to do it in England as well, but the anniversary was passing by then and I would have missed it. So it didn't seem right to be celebrating the anniversary of the White Album in 2019. So I was persuaded instead to anticipate the next one, which was Abbey Road, and readied a show that toured British theatres in the fall of 2019, and it was called Hornsey Road, just to be different. And it was a good experience for me. I'd never done anything like that before, but it took a long time to actually assemble. The whole purpose of it was really to earn money while I'm writing. And in the end, although it did earn money for me, it also took me away from the writing for a little bit too long. So I was determined to come up with another idea that would actually take a little less time, but still earn me some money. But COVID happened in between. So I didn't do anything until 2022. And that was this show, Evolver 62. And I did it only in London. I didn't have time to tour it, but it was filmed. And although it's taken 3+ years since then, the film of that 2022 stage show is what is now out. That's why it's called Evolver 62, because it's all about the year 1962. And for the film, we actually only have about half of the stage show content, but we also went out and did some new filming for it in London and in Liverpool. So it's quite a different product from the stage show, because anyone who was there in the theatre didn't get to see me out and about on film. They only saw me standing right there on stage. And then I did another one in 23 called Evolver 63. And my intention then was to go right through this decade, always with a show 60 years on. Evolver 64 in 2024, Evolver 65 in 2025, all the way to the end. But in the end, I've just decided that they just take up too much time, even though I've managed to find ways in which they take much less time, they still take too much. Because my sole thing is writing these days, and anything else is a distraction. So if I can get away with it without doing a show for the money, then I am. And so far, I've managed to make that work. So I haven't done anything since 2023. I may not do anything again. I don't know. On the other hand, the shows I did, like for the White Album and Abbey Road, I also did one about the Beatles in India, which I did I think I did that at a fest. They're coming round again in about 2 years' time. So being that they're done, I might just bring them back out again because, freshen them up a little bit. But the premise now is not to do anything that takes any particular time away from my writing.
Are you going to put the other ones out?
Well, the only one that was filmed was Evolver 62. Evolver 63 was not filmed, it was only audio recorded. I've done nothing with the audio. They were me sitting on a stage with celebrities who have a particular interest in the Beatles and a knowledge and were keen to talk about them. And it wasn't difficult for me to find celebrities to do that. But I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable or indeed to let them think I was exploiting them by filming them. So I didn't want to go there. So I just recorded them on audio, but I've done nothing with those files. The problem is always that there's not enough hours in the day, and the days are really meant to be devoted to my books. So anything else I do is a distraction. It's how much of a distraction I'm prepared to allow. But the only one that's filmed was the 62 show, and that's the one that's now out. It's streaming and you can buy it on DVD and Blu-ray, but it's not otherwise. I didn't do anything with the others really.
Is it safe to say that there were things in the movie that were not in your book?
No, not really. I mean, it was in essence the research that I gathered for writing the book Tune In. But whereas in the book you will get me explaining what happened or just quoting from something. In the stage show and in the film, you get to see the raw materials that I gathered while doing the research. So there is a lot of content in the film that wasn't in the book, but it was in order for me to write what I wrote that I gathered it in the first place. So there aren't any revelations in the film that you don't get in the book, but what you do get to see is the supporting materials. I'm very conscious of the fact that if you're doing any kind of a stage presentation, you really want to give the audience things to look at, because that makes a hell of a difference for the audience. Being that I had all this material and I gathered it and just put it away, I thought it was time to bring it out and let people see it. And that is what people really did enjoy in the theatre. And from what I gather, the feedback on the film is the same. It's so good to see all this stuff. But in the book, of course, it's simply not there. It's just informing my words, that's all. I don't think there's anything altogether new, though. But I mean, the Tune In has so much in it, and there's so much content that it's been surprising for me to realize how surprised people are by the content of the film. Going, I didn't know that. Well, actually, you have read it, but you've read so much in that book, and of course, it's been out a while that it's almost like the old memories still hold true rather than the new discoveries. So I'm presenting them again, and it's kind of they're being a surprise for people.
For somebody like me that lives in America that didn't get to see any of the lectures, and also who I have to be honest, I have not been to England, unfortunately. I really would love to get there. But to see some of those places in actuality in the film was really wonderful.
Oh, good. Yeah. You see, to me, they're all familiar places, but that's the beauty of a film is you don't know who's watching it and what their own personal interaction is with the places. There are other travelogues available, of course. Mine is not a travelogue, but I just go to some of the places where the stories took place. And I'm glad that for you, they were fresh.
What kind of feedback have you had on the film from people so far? I know you've been doing interviews, but from people in general, what
Well,
is
everyone seems to really enjoy it. I mean, it went down very well on the stage. It was a bit of a feat of endurance on the stage because I think the show ran pretty much 3 hours with
Hmm.
an interval, and there was no one on the stage but me, and I'm standing there basically just riffing. I mean, I know what's coming next. I've assembled it, and I know what it is I want to say, but I didn't ever say the same thing twice. I would have liked to have done the shows in further afield, but I'm a writer, and these things have a purpose, and the purpose is to, well, entertain the audience and make some money. The moment you start expanding your horizons, like coming to the States, you get into a whole bureaucratic rigmarole. So many forms to fill out, so many logistics to sort out. You've got to persuade an agent and a promoter and a venue, and it's just a different thing. So if I did only presentations, that wouldn't be an issue. But because every day that I'm in the States, I'm not here at my desk, then it just wasn't effective to even think about it, really.
Let me get into a few of the things that I found interesting uh,
Yeah.
in the film. I guess the basic question is, and you answer it in the film, but if you wouldn't mind, why is 1962 so important to them?
Well, it's the last year before the rocket takes off, but it's when they prime and fuel the rocket, if you like. Everything is in place by the end of the year for them to become, well, what we know they became, which is the biggest thing ever.
Right.
Unquestionably the biggest thing ever. No contenders for their crown ever. And that didn't happen by accident. It was a lot of planning and a lot of thought and a lot of prep and a lot of experience on their part to actually be in a position where they could sustain that and withstand what it would throw at them. In America, is 64 is the breakthrough year, but 63 was the breakthrough year in the UK, and 62 is the year when they get essentially when they really sign with Brian Epstein, when they end up with George Martin, when they end up with Dick James, when they're on Parlophone Records, when they've been in the charts, when they're beginning to tour, when they're breaking out beyond Liverpool, when they get rid of Pete Best and bring in Ringo, when Stuart dies, when they're broadcasting and radio and television. It's the breakthrough year. But at this time, they're really known only in Liverpool and a bit in Hamburg, perhaps, but really in Liverpool. And they have to break out beyond that glass ceiling. So 62 is a year when fundamental changes occur, which allow them in 63 to hit the ground running with their first number one by February. By the end of 63, which is not the year I'm covering, but by the end of 63, they are more famous than anyone had ever been before, really. And their record comes out in America. So, well, in fact, it does in 63 as well, generally. But 62 is a very special year because they are still able to move about a bit without being just drowned in their own fame, or at least having to withstand the pressures that it brought them. There's a lot going on. It's a very active year, but it's also a year with a very rich paper trail. And it's those papers that I show in the film.
One of the things that you say in the film that I thought was interesting was that they insisted on making it in Liverpool, not in London.
Yeah.
Were there advantages to being in, I know that London is a bigger city than Liverpool, but were there other advantages to making it in, were they really putting themselves in a disadvantage by sticking to Liverpool?
Yeah. Yeah, they were. They were. I mean, they had to come to London to do the things that happened only in London, such as recording studios. There were other studios here and there, but the record company's own studios were down in London and they wouldn't have entertained them, the idea of them recording anywhere else. And because they were signed to Parlophone Records, which was an EMI company, they had no alternative but to record at the EMI studios on Abbey.
Mhm.
That was their introduction to Abbey Road. Had they not been signed by Parlophone, they would never have recorded at Abbey Road. But nonetheless, the business was in London. So the whole infrastructure of there was regional television and regional radio, but nonetheless, it mostly happened in London. The biggest shows were in London. The newspapers were in London. There were four weekly musical papers in the UK at that time. They were all in London, as were the magazines. So essentially, you had to go to London. But their determination to make it from Liverpool principally occurred when they came down to London on the 9th of October 1962, which happened to be John Lennon's birthday. That
Mhm.
wasn't why they were down, but they happened to be coinciding with his 22nd birthday. And they were taken around the places in London that might promote their new record, Love Me Do, had been out since the previous Friday. And they received quite a lot of hostility about being from Liverpool, about speaking the way they spoke, and in particular about the fact that the name Beatles was such a ridiculous name and they would never make it with a name called Beatles. Why didn't they change it to something more publicly acceptable? The Beatles were the kind of people who, faced with such a response, just simply dug their heels in. They could have accepted what they were being told and compromised, but they weren't the uncompromising type. And so they were more determined than ever when going back to Liverpool to say, no, we're going to make it from here and we're not going to change our name. And you're either going to like us and accept us as we are or not. And they would rather not than make it. And this was a truism of the Beatles all the way through, that no matter how many opportunities were put their way, if they didn't like them, they weren't going to do them. So they did it without compromise, and that was very important to who they were and to the strength of what they had in later years. It turned out within a few months that Beatles was the most brilliant name that anyone could have imagined. But at the time, it wasn't considered that, and they had to change people's heads rather than have those people change them. They changed the heads instead.
Their insistence on doing things their way brings up the question, was Brian Epstein really the best manager they could have had? I mean, he did so many incredible things, starting from taking this unknown group to world fame, but he also made some mistakes, with the
Well, we would need to go through what you think those mistakes are in order for them to be considered.
well, one of them was the merchandising agreements in America. They got shortchanged on those, for one.
I would suggest, however, that there's more to that than you know.
Do you want to go into a little of it?
It's the book I'm writing now. It's never been told properly. It's never been told in a balanced way. Your information, your knowledge comes from people who have skewed it.
Oh, okay. I
What
mean,
other mistakes do you think Brian made?
well, I mean that was the one that really came to mind, was that
Yeah.
one, because it had such an effect on them.
Well, I mean, by the end of April 1964, they were on 45% and not 10.
Hmm.
That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, would they have got the money out anyway, no matter what their percentage was? Because the money was, it wasn't an obvious route back to them. And thirdly, had they received all the money, which they would never have done, they wouldn't have got it. It would have just gone to the taxman.
Right. Okay.
It wouldn't have profited them very much, if at all, had the circumstances been different.
You talk a lot in the film, which I found really interesting, about Brian as a manager and the things he dictated to them, getting up, being at the gigs on time, the methodical information about what they're making and everything like that. Just in general, just categorize the way he dealt with them.
Well, the very first, sorry, finish your question and then I'll
No,
jump in.
I mean that basically finishes the question.
Well, the very first question, and to answer, the very first thing to say is that I discovered when writing Tune In, and I put it down in black and white, that had Brian Epstein not come along and entered the Beatles world in November 1961, they were almost certainly going to break up. So the very first thing he does is prevent them from breaking up by just arriving in the nick of time and being the right man by far, because there were people in Liverpool who wanted to manage them that they would never have had as their manager. I mean, it makes me laugh when the perceived history is that Brian in some way kind of stole them or lured them away or in some way prevented them from being managed by the likes of Sam Leach
Mhm.
or Ray McFall or Bill Harry or Alan Williams, who had been their manager, or any of these characters in Liverpool who fancied that they might become the Beatles manager. What's never considered is that the Beatles would never have had those people as their manager. They wouldn't have accepted them. They were not suitable as far as the Beatles were concerned. Brian was, when he came along, cut of an entirely different cloth. They chose Brian as their manager. As John Lennon said in an interview, we choose you, rather than the other way around. They wanted this man and this man only because they were astute. He was the only man in Liverpool with a London address book. He was the only man in Liverpool who had an entree with all the record companies. They knew who he was. He knew who they were. When he phoned them up or contacted them, he wasn't just some Charlie they'd never heard of. He was someone they actually had a relationship with.
Right.
This was extraordinary. No one else in Liverpool had that. No one else but Brian would have loved them. in the way that he did. And he managed them while loving them. He didn't manage them for any other gain other than to make them the biggest thing ever. And along the way, he would potentially profit from their income, but he was not doing it for that reason. He was doing it because he believed in them. There wasn't another man on the planet who could. I mean, he just fell into their laps. Extraordinarily, he fell into their laps. It was because of who they were that they attracted him, of course, but nonetheless, he fell into their laps and then did everything he could. And I show in the film the first contract that he had with them that he deliberately weakened to be in their favor. So, I mean, what other man with the opportunity to manage young artists, very young, who are desperate to be successful and make money, and who are, in a sense, ripe for the taking, what other manager would ever come along and make sure the contract is in their favor and not his? Extraordinary. That's how lucky they were and how right he was. And there was nothing that Brian did for them in the next 5 years that was in any way really wrong, except potentially the merchandising thing. But there's so much more to that than has ever been told.
I wish you could give us a little
Yeah.
bit of a clue there.
But and all the way through to the end, he is. Now, when Alan Klein comes along in '69, he does the classic thing of picking up a previous contract and going, well, this contract is weak, 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 weak. There's you could drive a bus through that clause there. But it's the classic thing, oh, look what your previous manager's done to you, or whatever. And he turned their heads in the sense of making them think ill of Brian. But Alan Klein would never have done for them what Brian did. There's absolutely no way. And Alan Klein was a business manager and not a creative manager. And Brian's creativity for the Beatles, I mean, they had triumph after triumph. Well, all these things, the road they traveled on was paved by Brian Epstein. So there's no question that he was the most brilliant manager. And anybody who says otherwise simply isn't acquainted with the full facts. They're basing their opinion on Shout and all the books that have come since Shout, all of which have an agenda. No one's ever looked at it with neutrality before, which is what I'm doing. And I'm not out there to polish Brian Epstein's reputation or anybody's. I'm just looking at what actually happened. And the Beatles were the luckiest band ever to have Brian Epstein as their manager. And he was the luckiest guy ever to have the Beatles as artists. What a great partnership that was. I mean, when you've got a winning sports team year after year after year after year, do you really want to criticize the manager?
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you've got to beware of perceptions, and the perception is forged by writers who either have an agenda and wish to slant your thinking in their direction, or the general thing about that's out there, and with all due respect to you, what your knowledge about Brian is formed by people who've led you down particular paths.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why what I'm doing is so important, because no one's ever done a completely neutral book before. Everyone's always had an agenda.
Which makes me, I'm sitting here thinking that you're actually taking more of a journalistic view of them than other writers have.
No, I'm probably, well, we need to define what you mean by journalistic. I'm a historian and I'm looking at it from a historian's point of view. But unlike other Beatles books these days, where like the Ian Leslie book or trying to think of the other guy, but as an example, he's got his idea and he finds then his information to fit his idea and leaves out that which doesn't fit. But you end up reading the book going, oh, that's quite convincing. But what you don't know is he's chosen his knowledge. I'm not choosing anything. I'm just putting down what I find. And there is a big difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a real problem with almost all those books that people like these days for that reason.
Is there, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there a book that you actually respect? I'm not saying that in a nasty tone, but is there a book that you respect?
I know what you mean. There are loads of books that I really respect that don't set out to do that. Books of information.
Hmm.
Bruce Spizer's books, John Wynn's books, Chip Maddinger's books, all those books are done by people who are out there harvesting everything they can find. Piers Hemingson's books on Canada, Greg Armstrong and Andy Neal's book on the Beatles tour of Australia, and so on. These are all masterworks. But in terms of biography, that's a whole other thing. And I don't know that the Beatles have ever had a completely open-minded, fair-minded biographer who just set down what he found without any agenda of any kind. I might be wrong. Maybe there have been one or two. I don't know. Hunter Davis obviously is in a different category because he was writing his book at the time they were still together. His book has weaknesses, but it also has so many strengths because he was present at events that are still unfolding as he wrote them. You can't beat that immediacy in a sense. But once we get into the business of retrospective biography, I have issues with them. I mean, my book, my trilogy is taking a bloody long time, and I wish it wasn't. But one of the reasons it's taking a bloody long time is because there's a bloody lot to be found. And anyone who, like Shout, for example, the book was done in like 18 months from start to finish, or maybe 2 years. I might be doing a disservice, 2 years, not much more than that. You can't do this book. You can't do this subject in that period of time. Research and writing, you just can't. You have to be picky in what you look at. And I don't want to be picky. I just want to find what's there. And it's a whole different thing.
And given what you found in the just in the first book alone, I mean that says a lot right there. It really does.
Yeah, well, this worn out question of is there anything more to know about the Beatles? Well, of course there is, because what you know is not necessarily good enough, you know.
Let's talk about Stuart.
Yeah.
He died before, he missed the whole thing. What was his, and actually include Astrid in that because, she had a lot to do with their early days too. What was his lasting influence on them?
Style. His lasting influence was style. And Astrid and Jürgen and Klaus come in because principally of Stuart. And Astrid's relationship is with Stuart. So they may not, I mean, who knows what ifs, but they may not have gathered these three very important German friends had Stuart not been in the Beatles in the first place. Stuart was, as John Lennon said, I think to Hunter Davis, though he rarely spoke about Stuart because very few people ever asked him, if anybody, but he trusted Stuart to tell him the truth on things, as he also trusted Paul. And I think George and Ringo as well fall into the same category. And Brian, and I don't know that there was maybe Cynthia, Yoko. These are the upper echelon of people in John Lennon's life, to name but one person, who would speak the truth to him in a way that he accepted, whether it was kind or unkind. He knew that it was the truth and he needed to hear it. So Stuart is absolutely vital to the Beatles in the year and a bit that he's with them. And he's not considered so because the suggestion is always that he couldn't play or couldn't play very well. I don't think that was true for long anyway. He was a beginner at the beginning. I don't think he was a beginner after a year or a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Klaus says he was all right as a bass player, and Klaus would know. So I wasn't present and I wouldn't necessarily know anyway. But if Klaus says he was pretty good, then okay, he was pretty good by the end. May not have been good enough for Paul's standards, and Paul's standards brilliantly have always been very high. He caused a problem in the Beatles in as much as he came between John and Paul to an extent. John's leadership of the Beatles, which is what it was, undoubtedly was the kind where people had to sort out their own differences. He didn't come in and rescue anybody. If there was a problem between Paul and Stuart had to work it out. And that's just the way it was. That was always the way it was with the Beatles. But he was vital, and he left in the end of June 1961. But he was still around in spring 62. And in fact, I didn't know this when I wrote Tune In, but amongst the things I found out since that book came out is that when they make their first ever BBC radio broadcast in March of 1962 from Manchester in the north of England, but for national BBC Radio, Stuart was there as an observer in the radio
Mm.
studio when they were making their broadcast. So this important moment, only a month before he dies at the age of 21, he's actually there for it. That was a nice recent, relatively recent discovery.
Oh,
And I mean, had he not died, we don't know what would have happened next, but it's hard to imagine that he wouldn't have played some role artistically or stylistically or something in the Beatles. As it is, they have their first number one record 10 months after he's died. 10 months. And of course, it's a kind of a footnote in the Beatles' story, but it's not a footnote in their lives. You know, he was close to them and they were close to him.
were the Beatles that rough a group when
Yeah.
Brian came in? Were they that rough a group, or were they on their way at
They
that
were
point?
rough when Stewart joined them, and those
Okay.
recordings from 1960, which are quite hard to get through, are proof of
Yeah.
musically how rough they were. They had skills, obviously, they had harmonies, they had their vocals, and I can't believe that. I mean, they could, George could play a bit, and Paul could, I'm sure, play very well already. John was probably fairly rough, but it was Hamburg that gelled them. I mean, when they were going to go to Hamburg in 60 and Howie Casey said, don't send over that bum group, the Beatles, or words to that effect, it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but I mean, his experience of them was seeing them in May at the audition for Larry Parnes, and no doubt they were fairly poor. So you can understand why he said that, but it was the making of them in a way that, you know, couldn't possibly have been anticipated. By the time Stuart, by the time Brian comes along, they're hot. They're really hot in a rough way, but they're hot. I mean, they've gone through the whole of 1961 really before Brian sees them, because he sees them in November, and they're undoubtedly the best thing around. So they've got a lot going for them by then, and they've attracted such a body of fans as well by then, such a devoted body of fans. They've got a fan club as well. Mm.
One of the big moments in the film is when you talk about Pete and the firing of Pete.
Yeah,
And it, the way you describe it, it was, you say, it was really no big deal.
yeah.
But in talking to people in Liverpool, and it seemed to me that it was a bigger deal than, there were people that were very devoted and, very, very much a fan of Pete that didn't want to see him go.
What you've just said needs a lot of qualifying.
Okay.
And I jump in quickly and say I wasn't present in Liverpool in 1962, so I don't know any of this firsthand, but I made it my business to speak to a lot of people, many of whom had never spoken before, and their stories were fresh. Those who liked Pete the most were still Beatles fans. You know how all Beatles fans, we're fans of the Beatles, but we might, and it's not true in my case, but generally we people might like John first more, or Paul more, or George more, or Ringo more. They have their favorite, but they still love the Beatles as a whole. So Pete's fans were not Pete fans, they were Beatles fans who liked Pete the most. There's a key distinction there, because what they really liked was the Beatles, and their favorite, the one they would warm to the most from their vantage point in the audience in the Cavern or Litherland or Aintree or Grosvenor Ballroom or wherever they were watching them, was that guy at the back. Why did they like him? Because he never said anything, and they found that attractive. It was principally a girl thing, not entirely, but mostly, because some girls will gravitate towards the shy one who never says much. But when they got rid of Pete, they didn't get these people did not quit the Beatles. So his fans were not Pete fans only, they were Beatles fans who liked Pete. When Pete left, they were unhappy, but then they stayed, and then they got used to Ringo, or they found that they liked Paul the most, or George the most, or John the most, or Ringo the most, but no one left. And I mean, how many bands have there been where the front line, where one guy three guys or four guys decide to get rid of one. And in this case, the entire front line all felt that their drummer wasn't good enough. Not me saying he wasn't good enough or anybody else saying he wasn't good enough. They thought he wasn't good enough. And, bands change personnel all the time.
Mm.
Unfortunate thing was that it was 2 months before their first record came out. It was 4 days before the TV cameras were coming, which he was really looking forward to being on television. And that he then had to watch from the sidelines while they became the biggest thing ever. But I don't know that they would have been the biggest thing ever if Pete had been their drummer. I think things would have been different. The chemistry was right with Ringo, and it wasn't quite right with Pete. And that's what they felt. It's not what I feel. It's what they felt.
What do you think of the way that Pete has restored himself? The Best family has the museum now. They've been doing all sorts of things. He's retired from performing, which
Yeah.
we still don't know the reason unless you do.
Well,
Um,
I don't, I'm not close to the family, but I mean, Pete was he born in 41? So as of now, he's 84. That's
I
fair
mean,
enough to
just
hang
sort
up
of
your sticks at 84. That's all right.
okay.
He looks well, and I hope he is, but I don't know. But I
One thing.
mean,
Go
Pete. I
ahead.
mean, Pete's been impacted by the Beatles very, very significantly. I mean, the Beatles terminated his employment as of now, 64 years ago. But apart from a period between 1966 and about 78, when he kept a low profile, which is 12 years, in the 64 years since his sacking, he's been a Beatle adjunct, if you like, you know. And the family, I mean, Pete's half brother, Neil Aspinall's son, Rogue, has a museum in Liverpool that is devoted to the Beatles and with a particular slant on the early days, of course, understandably. So the Beatles have owned them a living for most of the years since 1962. So he's done all right.
Yeah, it certainly has.
Yeah.
One thing that I don't think is talked about enough. We know that John and Paul had a bond between them, but George and Ringo did too, and I think it's never emphasized enough how much of a bond they had. Do you think that has been really underestimated how close they were?
I don't know about the underestimation bit because I don't know anyone who has underestimated it. It's not really something that I've ever heard discussed. Maybe that answers your question.
Mhm.
Neil Aspinall, and there was no one closer to the Beatles than Neil, said to me that the Beatles are a chain. You have to understand the chain. And obviously, this was something that was paramount within the position that he held running their company for so long and working for them before that. I mean, basically, Neil was with them from 1961 to 2007. It's a very long time with complexities that we'll never know about. Much, much more than people realize. And he explained the chain to me. So this, you're getting this from Neil via me.
Mhm.
The chain is John, Paul, George, and Ringo, meaning that is the order in which they joined and how each person was there. Paul was there because John brought him in. George was there because Paul brought him in, and Ringo was there because George brought him in. Yes, of course, John and Paul also wanted Ringo, but the prime mover behind Ringo joining the Beatles was George. The prime mover behind George joining the Quarrymen was Paul, and John picked Paul. And within that chain is a psychological imperative that no one ever stops to think about, but is true to their lives. George and Ringo, therefore, have always been close. And they had a particular closeness that was not, I mean, John and Ringo were very close. John and George were very close. Paul and Ringo have been close. Paul and George a little less so, but of course they've been close. But the key closenesses, if there is such a word, are the ones I outlined or were outlined to me by Neil. So George and Ringo were always close. And in the film Evolver 62, I show pictures of George with the black eye that he sustained in the cavern. In the very busy week in August 1962, it seems, having done my research, that it was nothing to do with the dismissal of Pete and the hiring of Ringo. But that wasn't what they thought. Ringo felt that George took a black eye for him, and George felt that he got his black eye because of his support for Ringo. And therefore, that was an even greater bond between them that may not have actually been true. But they felt it was true, and that's all that counts. They were very close. And of course, their closeness was tested in the 1970s by certain actions, which are nothing to do with my film, but they still survived it.
One of the, I don't know that if you want to call it a big moment in their history, was when they insisted on not releasing How Do You Do It? Because they stood up to George Martin. I mean, they called the shots. And for a young group at that stage, that was pretty big, wasn't it?
Well, it's in Tune In that they didn't do that. They did stand up to George Martin. They did try to call the shots. They were ignored by George Martin, who listened to John Lennon and then said, tough, I'm still going to release How Do You Do It? But other factors came into play that prevented How Do You Do It being issued. They didn't know those other factors and thought how wonderful George Martin was for paying heed to their request that How Do You Do It not be issued. They didn't know that it was denied for other reasons, and that actually, had George Martin got his way, it would have come out. And I do explain that in the film a little bit, but I don't go into too much detail, but it is in the book.
Okay.
Tune In has been out such a long. The funny thing about Tune In, I was talking to a friend of mine in Germany, or texting the other day, is that the accepted history had been around so long when Tune In came out in 2013 that it still somehow prevails, even though I demonstrated and proved by documented knowledge that they were wrong and that this was actually how it happened. And yet somehow or other, we still think the old way. And I'm a bit guilty of that myself. I have to remind myself, no, actually, though they did have balls enough to send John up to speak to George Martin while the others waited downstairs. And he went up and said, please, please, please don't release How Do You Do It? It's not our taste and we don't want it. George Martin did not listen to them. But in the next few days, the other factors came into play. He couldn't release it. And they thought, what a wonderful man. He listened to us. And that was wonderful for their relationship. And I don't know that George Martin ever disabused them of that thought. I don't know. Probably didn't, because they still think it, as you still think it, but it's not true.
Okay.
But to the first part of your question is the valid point. They had the balls to do it. I mean, they always spoke up for themselves, and that marked them out as different, even if on this one occasion it didn't work, except ultimately it did.
When you were playing that interview tape, the first interview tape, were you worried that that thing was gonna tangle or break?
Oh, yeah. Didn't even cross my mind.
Oh, good, good, good. I was sitting there going, God, I hope nothing happens to that tape. My God.
Yeah, and I'm not very good at, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with threading spools of tape, from, I mean, I've done it plenty of times, but it's not something I do very often these days. So you're talking about the Beatles' first interview.
Right.
Yeah, that was nice because I bought that tape off the man who did the interview, Monty Lister, back in about 1985. And there is this picture of them doing the interview. He stepped out, Monty, and a couple of lads from the youth club stepped in, but nonetheless, it was that session. And I'd never seen the space where they actually did that. And the director of the film, Chris Purcell, said, let's find it. It's got to be here somewhere in this hall. And we started going into the other rooms that the public aren't admitted to. And there it was, exactly, well, not quite the same, but recognizably the same place. And he had brought along this old tape deck. So he wanted to hear that tape in that room. I mean, it was quite a clever idea on his part, directorially, to do that. So I had to thread it on the machine, but it was a treat to hear it after all those years in the very space where they recorded it.
You included that in the record that came with
My first book.
first book.
Yeah, the Beatles Live. Yes, because I've been in the Beatles fan club in the late 1960s when you would receive a record every Christmas time, a little flexi disc record from the Beatles fan club of a unique recording that they didn't actually release commercially. And I wanted to have a flexi disc in my book because they were such desirable little objects. And that was the perfect thing to include on it. And at that time, it had barely been heard by anybody. But of course, now it circulates.
One of the things I noticed when you mentioned the formation of the Rolling Stones, the just below it was the name Long John Baldry, and I was surprised you didn't say something about him.
Was that from that piece in Jazz News?
I believe it was, yes.
Well, my show was 3 hours, and you know people could see it. Those in the
Right.
audience and indeed watching the film, you could see it. But I just tried to keep to the bit, stay on topic, as it were, and talk about the formation of the Rolling Stones and that great quote from Mick Jagger saying, "I hope they don't think we're a rock and roll outfit."
Yeah.
That's in 1962.
That was. Let me go through a couple of quick things. First of all, yesterday was the passing of Len Garry.
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
anything to say about that? About him?
I didn't know Len very well, but we know who he was and what he did. And I mean, I've got the photo on my wall of the Quarrymen from late 1957 with John and Paul standing at the microphones there.
Hmm.
And there is Len, you know, there's Len and one of the original Quarrymen. There's only two left now. And Rod Davis, one of the two, was only with them for a very short while and was gone by the time that picture was taken. So there's only Colin Hanton and Rod Davis left now. And so it's sad to see any Quarryman go,
Right.
but he lived to 80 something. And we have an expression in England, maybe you have it in the States as well with baseball in mind, but we have a cricket expression, which is he had a good innings.
Hmm.
May he rest in peace. That's all I
Yeah.
can say.
Yeah, I agree. May he rest.
I got his book when it came out, Len Garry, which was must have been in the 90s, I think it was.
I think
Um,
it was. Yeah.
yeah, and I saw him on stage a few times and I interviewed him a couple of times. And yeah, these people were there. You know, there he is at Walton Fate when John meets Paul. He's right there in that picture. Fantastic.
What did you think of Anthology 4?
I can understand everyone's disappointment by it. Well, I don't know if everyone was disappointed, but there was widespread disappointment, and I can understand. I read all the people and heard them all saying the reasons why they were disappointed. It was a shame to include things that were already out. There were certain things that did beg to be reused, like I say we because I was involved doing the
Mm.
Free as a Bird and Real Love singles, that we had stuff on the CD singles that weren't included on the anthology albums. That was ripe for being used again. But it was a shame to have the stuff from the deluxe box sets. I've read Giles Martin say that substantially that's it, that there is more, but in terms of things that they feel justify a big splash, a new splash, then probably that's it. I would argue with that, but I also understand where he's coming from. It was all right. The whole thing, everything is changing with Apple Core now. And those of us who have had the benefit of all these box sets, we obviously want more. There's always a thing of what's next. And I think what's next is going to be quite different now because I think they turned a corner. And that Anthology 4 was probably halfway around the corner, if you like.
Okay. A few months ago, I sent you an email about the Decatape reel that was discovered in Canada. You
Yeah.
and I communicated, and you said at the time that you didn't think it was a big deal. But when I talked to the guy, Rob Frith, he told me that, and I thought he was joking at the time. He said, Paul McCartney wants it. I'll give it to him for free. Well, he did.
Did he?
He,
Okay.
yeah, he gave it to
If
him. He met him in Los Angeles, gave it to him. Paul signed some pictures for him, and Paul has the tape now.
either Paul or Apple, maybe he's given it to Apple. I don't know.
Right, right.
No,
But
we don't know.
yeah,
I'm really pleased. The only reason I thought it wasn't a big deal is because it's microscopically better than what we have in terms of sonic
hmm
quality. If it was a very significant upgrade, I'd be super excited. But because it's a real, I mean, they went to extraordinary lengths to prove its originality and top marks for that. But I mean, I guess my lack of excitement is only because it's not going to give us anything we don't have.
Well, there are people, and I have to admit I didn't follow it minutely like they did, but there were people on YouTube that said there was stuff that was a little
Well,
bit.
then I'm more excited than I thought I was. But that wasn't my understanding of it. I thought it was just exactly what we already had, just a generation better, but sonically, I mean, they were having to go to great lengths to establish that it was the original. So it wasn't like outstandingly obvious. I mean, I'll take anything that we've never had before very, very gladly. And if it does lead to a sonic upgrade, then great, absolutely great. I wish it was still in its box. I don't think it's in its box.
Could you see them releasing that? And also, there's been talk about Peter Jackson working on the Hamburg tapes. Could you see them releasing either of those?
I have no inside scoop on anything like that.
Just your opinion. Could you see them doing that from the perspective that you?
The decade, I mean, we've got it. I remember them coming out on colored vinyl in about 1977, was that?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it
that's
was in the
50
70s.
years next year since we've actually had this stuff.
Hmm.
And only it seemed like forever, but actually only 15 years after it was recorded, we've had 50 years. That can't be right. Yes, yeah, because next year will be 65 years. So 15 plus 50.
Right.
I'm not that bothered about it, about them sticking out the Decca. You know, I have this thing now when it comes to Beatles audio, which is that I just think it's all fair game. I think they are the world's treasure. They are the greatest contribution to art that I can think of, certainly in terms of recorded music. Look, it's highly speculative and opinionated, this, but what I'm trying to say is they kind of belong to the world now. They've made an absolute fortune then and since. I wouldn't begrudge them any of it. They will have ways of making money going forward, of that there is no doubt. But in terms of recordings, I just think put it all out. Doesn't matter what label it's on, doesn't matter who's done it. It's just all for the enrichment of humankind. So whether do I care if they put out Decca? Not really, because I've already got it. Do I care if they put out the Hamburg tapes? Yes, if that's an improvement. The bootleggers are doing, I mean, not bootleggers, just amateur recorder files, audio files are doing great work with the Hamburg tapes. I got another sonic upgrade just before Christmas that was even better than ever. So that's getting better even without Apple or Peter Jackson having a say in it. But I just think that I just want to hear everything. I just want every single scrap of recording, I think, is fair game. And whether it's on an official label or it's on an unofficial label or no label, just for the benefit of humankind, that's fine.
Okay.
Like it sounds rebellious and a bit crazy, but I'm not, as artists, they have a right to retain copyright or ownership of it. But I just think that they've done extremely well. We'll always buy stuff if they put it out, even if we've already got it. I think that's already
Yeah,
proven.
I agree with you on that one.
I just think every press conference, every interview, every piece of recording, every take from the studio, just it should all be available now. All of it. And whether it's official or unofficial kind of doesn't matter now.
I would really like to see the Hamburg tapes, that Peter Jackson do what he's talked about with the Hamburg tapes, because the anthology four did, or the anthology itself, the new anthology did have a little bit of I can't
Yeah,
think of the song now, and I just went, whoa.
it did. Well, this new release that came out unofficially before Christmas is also a bit of a wall as well. I quite like them being rough, though. I mean, what a gift to have as a recording. The Beatles doing 2 hours in Hamburg just before they break through, and right at the very end of their fifth and final Hamburg club stint, they're recorded, and we've got it. We never really appreciated how wonderful that was back in the day, back in
No, we did.
'77. But what a gift for all of us that we have that. Similarly, I'm about to do an event at the British Library in London on the 4th of April, which will be the anniversary of the Beatles at Stowe School. And who knew until 3 years ago that that was recorded?
Right.
And it's relatively lo-fi, but what an extraordinary thing to have. What an
Hmm.
insight, what a gift to learning and appreciation that is to have that recording.
Yeah, really.
So whether it comes out officially or unofficially, it doesn't really matter, just so long as we have it.
That's very true. What's the status of the books? I have to ask that.
I'm writing volume two. I've been writing it for a while. It's taking an age. It's a very complex, very comprehensive piece of work.
Hmm.
That's all I can say. I don't know when I know when it's coming out, I'll say. So the occasional Amazon flash that it's coming out on a given date, don't believe it. Unfortunately, I wish it was true, but don't believe it. Whatever Amazon say at the present time is not official. I will say when it's done and when it's ready, but it isn't ready yet, and I'm afraid it's going to be a while. It's monopolizing my life. It's all I do. I mean, people get uppity about this film. All this film is something that I did 3.5 years ago, that I did for necessity. I mean, I'm talking to you. That's an hour out of my writing time. But apart from that, I'm on it all the time. So I'm not dragging my heels, but wow, what a job this is.
People are concerned that, are we going to see this? Is that,
I appreciate the fact. I mean, if I was spending all this time on something that no one was even considering or had forgotten all about, then I'd be wondering why I'm knocking myself out. But it's gratifying to know that people are patiently waiting, or in some cases, impatiently waiting. But there's nothing I can do to speed it up other than work flat out, which is what I do. And some people think I'm not working effectively enough, but I am. It's just a lot to do.
there's no, there, I grant that you can't give us a particular date. Can you give me is there a general time you can say?
No, I'm like every prediction I've ever made on this trilogy, and I've now been on it for 23 years. Every prediction has been wildly wrong. So I've just stopped making them. All I'm going to do is just carry on doing it until it's done and then it's out. And then I'll do the third one and then that'll be out. The race is against my own mortality. It's not a given deadline other than that.
Are the books close to being done? In other words, are
No.
they? No. Okay. Okay. I guess,
Well, I mean, in terms of, I mean, having done 23 years of research, I haven't got 23 years to go. So I'm well towards completing them, but that doesn't mean that they're close.
are they both about the same, or
Well,
is the
I'm
second?
writing two before I write three, so they'll both be huge.
Are you looking at doing just the expanded versions for both of them, or you
Well,
don't?
it wasn't so much, I mean, to remind you, it wasn't really an expanded version. It was the All I Wrote edition, from which I
Right.
then cut down an edition to be the mainstream edition. The All I Wrote will be very substantial in both instances. I'm quite confident of that. Yeah. And then I imagine I'll have to do the same again and cut them both down for the mass market. That's
Okay.
an operation in itself. And it can only be done by me because it's kind of, I write these books as a weave, and you can't take this out there without it affecting several other things. No one else could know that but the writer. So, yeah. I mean, no one ever, I'm not inviting anyone to think of it from my point of view because they don't have to. But from my point of view, I came up with this idea 23 years ago. It was the right idea and I'm going about it the right way, but I don't know that I realized quite what I was taking on. I mean, it is completely monopolizing my life. And I mean, all around me, all my contemporaries are retired. I won't be retiring. I have no possibility of retiring. And that might sound like a gift, how lovely to be doing what you do, which is true. But on the other hand, I envy my friends' holidays and things like that. But, I've I've started, so I'll finish. I'm
Okay.
very proud to be doing it. I'm very happy to be doing it. It never gets me down, and I'm never depressed about it. I just know that I've got a mountain in front of me.
There's nothing much more that I can say than, we're waiting. That's what I can
Well,
say.
it's a thrill to hear that. It is, and it hurts me to be disappointing people because nothing would please me more than to be able to tell people it's ready and coming out next year or even later this year. But it won't be. So let's all get real on this one. I
Okay.
mean, if you're a big Lyndon B. Johnson fan, are you hucking Robert Caro to finish, or are you just respecting the fact that this man is taking an extremely long time because that's how long it needs to take,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, pick up, shout if you want to read something that's done in a hurry,
Right.
you know?
Right. But that's not what we're dealing with here.
No,
So
no.
there's nothing much more I can say, Mark, than number one, thank you for talking to me. Thank you for doing what you're doing. I mean, and I know, I mean, I'm not going to sound like, I don't know, but I know I carry the feelings of millions of people who agree. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to do what I do. And it's also a pleasure. I am a Beatles fan myself. I'm not removed from what it feels like to be a fan. I never will be. Hang in there. That's all I can say. We must all live well in this ever more troubled world.
let me ask one more question. And Paul Ringo just announced a new album today.
Yeah,
Paul is out doing what he's doing.
with
You
another
have,
new album out this year, I hope.
yeah, that's apparently the word.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about them solo wise? Is there anything to say?
I just want to say, on a human level, that it's just extraordinary that they're still out there, both doing what they want to do, that they've lived long lives, and that they have sufficient health that they can fulfill themselves in the way that they are. And there's no compulsion on anyone to buy anything. What you think of their art is purely as independent. You know, everyone will have their own subjective thoughts on that, but they're out there making people happy. And I just think that's fantastic. And they're just living life the way they want to live. Thank goodness for that. How brilliant that is. Because Ringo is 86 this year and Paul is 84 this year. And we lost John and George a long time ago. I mean, they're both now more than twice the age that John Lennon ever was.
Hmm.
And they've been through that tragedy, but in themselves, and they've got their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, and that is just fantastic.
Yeah.
So top marks to both of them, really top marks.
Okay. Well, that's really all I have to ask. Thank you again very much for your patience in enduring my questions
No, I've enjoyed it. It's been
and
a good conversation.
educating me along the way. But I enjoyed this a lot.
Known you a long time, Steve. So, and you're very dedicated to serving the Beatles public as well, and your own love of the Beatles is absolutely clear. We are long-term fans, and I recognise that in you, as hopefully you do in me. And yeah,
I definitely
it's just
I
great to
def
have the Beatles in our lives. That's all really. And
it,
the
it
more
it
the more you know them, the more you love them.
that's true. That's true.
Mm.
Thank you again. This has been, I hope we get to do this again soon, but I know that's probably not going to happen, but
Um, Well, you never know. The next time there's something to be said. But I mean, if I go quiet for a while, you know what I'm doing.
I know we'll know what you're doing.
Scribbling away.
Now
Mm.
I'm gonna punch around here and hit the stop recording button. And that's it for this show. We hope you enjoyed it. We have some good stuff in the works, some really, really good stuff in the works. I'm not going to give you any hints yet, but they will be announced shortly. And I think you will be quite interested in those shows too. If you don't subscribe to us already, please do. I'm not doing any news briefs today, but the news gets posted to my Beatles News and Information site on Facebook. So please check in there and take a look and see what's going on. Join if you haven't joined. And by all means, subscribe and give us a like on this podcast, wherever you see it, whether you see it on YouTube or in audio. In any event, till next time, this is Steve Marinucci. Be seeing you.
Thanks very much for listening to our podcast today. If you enjoyed our program, we'd really appreciate a positive review at the place where you get your podcasts. Apple and Google love positive reviews, and it really helps us. If you don't already, please subscribe to our show so you'll get our newest shows right away. We have some great shows coming up. We would love to hear your suggestions for the show, so please write to us at BeatlesNewsBriefs@gmail.com or catch us online on Facebook in our Beatles News and Information group. If you've missed any of our past shows, you can hear them at marinucci.podbean.com, and please tell your friends about us. We appreciate you all for listening. Now here again is Steve Marinucci.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. You can hear our complete list of shows at marinucci.podbean.com in audio and in video and audio at youtube.com. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. We would love to have you, and you'd find out about the shows as soon as they're published. Again, thanks for supporting us, and take care, everybody, and until next time, we'll be seeing you.
What a show! What a show!